Hey guys, and welcome to one more episode of Builder Nation. For today's scene that we have Jim Cantrell, CEO and co-founder at Phantom Space, the company developing the next generation of space commerce. So welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for being here. Highly appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so I usually refer to myself as a builder. I like to build things. I don't care if it's cars or spaceships or businesses or homes. It's the art of building that interests me. But I've been in the aerospace industry for a little over 30 years, and I've done a lot of interesting things there. I've had the fortune to work with some great people, and one of them that's most notable is Elon Musk and helping start SpaceX. And but prior to that, I was at the French Space Agency for a number of years. I worked with NASA. And then did a lot of work with the Department of Defense in post-Soviet Russia to help stop brain drain over there. And since SpaceX, I've been working with a lot of startups in the commercial space area, namely ICEYE and Planet and Skybox Imaging, among many others. And you mentioned Phantom, which is my latest startup, which I started 3 years ago. And we're focused on making space happen more often and more cheaply by using mass production. So we're looking to become the Henry Ford of space is really what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, you have been kind of like all over the place in the industry. You have been international. I mean, working in the same industry. So I think that's amazing. And talking about Phantom, I wanted to ask you about the latest news. Now, I know that you guys successfully staged a hot fire test at Spaceport America last November. So maybe you can share a little bit about it. What was it like?
Yeah, so we're in the process of building our first vehicle called the Daytona. And it's we believe, the world's most inexpensive vehicle that's capable of launching 500 kilograms into space. So as part of that development process, we're testing stage components. So these are stages of the rocket that could fly in space, but weren't really necessarily made to fly in space. But we can test it out on the ground. And so we started with our second stage. It's a two-stage rocket. And this has about 80% of the functionality of the overall rocket because all the avionics and software and all that resides on the second stage and continues on after the first stage burns out. So it was a very complete test of the vehicle. And we used Ursa Major's engines that we've contracted with those guys, and they're a major partner with us. And the test went flawlessly. We ran the stage for 60 seconds on a test stand out in Spaceport America. And it was really a great success. We spent a lot of time last summer testing it a little closer to home in our test yard, as we call it, working out the bugs and the gremlins and things like that. But by the time we got to Spaceport America, everything went very smoothly. And the result after one test was everything hit the mark 100%. So we called it a success.
Wow. Well, congratulations on that. And so you're mentioning, I mean, this is a big step, or this was a big step for the launch of Daytona, that I think it's at the end of this year, right?
Yeah, that's the plan, is to launch at the end of the year. Everything seems to be coming along to that goal. Things happen, but it looks pretty good for now. And we're working with the FAA to get licensing. We're working on a test of the first stage, which has 9 engines. So that requires a new test facility, which we're building here in Tucson. And so we expect our first launch out of Vandenberg. We've got a use of Slick 8, which is the multi-user pad down there, set aside for the end of the year. And we'll keep our fingers crossed and hopefully we can make it. It'll be record time, a little bit over 4 years from start to first launch.
And are you guys planning on doing another test anytime soon? I mean, you mentioned 9 engines, right?
Yeah, that'll be a series of tests. So to fire 9 engines on a stage, one of the big issues is how do you ignite them simultaneously without things going boom. And so we have Chris Thompson, who's our CTO, and he was very key at SpaceX on the Falcon 9, which had 9 engines as well. So he's been through this before. And so we'll be doing a sequence of tests where we start with just 1 engine, then we'll go with 3, and then 6, and then 9, and gradually work our way up to that. That'll be sometime this summer, and that'll be a major milestone test for us.
You mentioned your path, right, in the industry, that it has been over 30 years, you were saying. So what do you think Phantom Space is making the difference in the industry?
We're just taking a different look at things. I like to think of what SpaceX might have been like 20 years later is really what we're trying to do. And the same objective of making space more affordable, less barriers to getting there. And for us, that's cost, and it's also frequency of flight, and it's also convenience of where people are going. So, right now, about half of the satellite industry are satellites under 500 kilograms. So that's the growing part of the industry. It's probably going to be within 10 years, 3/4 of the up mass that goes up. And so many of these satellites need to go to unique places, and with a small launch like ours, we'll be able to accommodate that. And that's a very important feature for a lot of companies. The second thing is that by using mass production, we're actually able to keep the cost down. We're charging $4 million per launch. And I can tell you our first bill of materials for our first vehicle is under $4 million. So we're actually going to hit the cost targets. There seems to be nothing in our way of not meeting it. So I think between those two things, we'll continue the tradition that SpaceX has done, but on the smaller scale, and addressing really a growing part of the market that's being largely ignored. And
you started 3 years ago. I mean, that's kind of like soon for a space startup, right?
Yeah, it's pretty fast. We looked at the environment 3 years ago and decided then, this was pre-COVID, that capital would be hard to raise. We believed that the bets had been placed on launch vehicles, and then it'd be hard to fit another launch vehicle capital raise in the midst of it. So we set ourselves up to be very capital efficient, plus utilize the least amount of it. And what that's ended up resulting in is a very quick schedule. So part of how we got there was to use as much of the supply chain that exists as we could. Thus Ursa Major, they spent 5 years and several $100 million building their engines, which are jewels. I mean, we can't produce them for the cost they're producing them. And so that was a big part of our strategy. We also licensed our avionics and software from NASA. And so as much of the supply chain that was reasonable and available, we utilized, and what was not, like valves and tanks and things like that, we're building ourselves. So it's a different approach from SpaceX, who sought 20 years ago to build everything themselves because there was no supply chain that could fit their cost model. And that's a little different now, and it allows us to go at a much faster pace.
And talking about supply chain, did you have any, maybe procurement issues when the pandemic started?
No, the pandemic really didn't affect us too much. By the time it hit, it was February of 2020, and we hadn't really ramped up employment. And my co-founder Mike and I had started with our own money, and so we had plenty of money to last us through the initial phases of that. And it turned out, as the market is kind of crazy today as well, that aerospace and defense and space in particular has remained a favored target of investors. And it's certainly, with the Ukraine war breaking out, the importance of space elements in national defense is becoming more and more obvious to everybody in the world. So we've been fortunate to ride those tailwinds, and it's not really, the supply chain has not really been a problem in the sense of COVID impacted supply chain issues. It's more the traditional, people aren't buying a lot of these valves in particular, and so the lead time on getting that stuff is very long. It's very expensive. So we've solved that by just doing it ourselves when we need to.
One of the last questions, talking about what are the next steps. We know that we have Daytona, the launch at the end of this year, but do you have anything else
Yeah, so we were awarded a $300 million task order contract from NASA as a launch supplier to them, and we've won four of the task orders that have come out for launch, and we're real proud of that. I'm looking forward to launching those, in some of the early manifests of our vehicle. We also have a satellite business, which is a companion to the launch, and we right now have four contracts in place where we're designing satellites, and two of them will take us through the build phase, and we'll also launch their constellations. So that is something to watch out for the next few years. It's a little bit like SpaceX and Starlink. We see launch as a strategic asset as well as a way to make money, and you use that then to deploy constellations. We're going to start with third-party constellations with companies that we partner with, and later we'll build out our own, which we call Phantom Cloud.
Very exciting news for the company. Thank you so much for sharing that as well. And last but not least, do you have any advice for future entrepreneurs, people starting on this industry?
Yeah, my best advice for you is never give up. It's I came across a picture of a boxer last night, and he was in the shadows and had his head down, and his hands were wrapped and kind of bleeding through the edges. And that's how you end up as an entrepreneur. It's a little bit like eating glass, I think somebody said before me, and you have to enjoy the taste of blood, but you can never give up. If you're going to be successful, you're going to get knocked down many times, and you got to stand back up and get back in the fight.
That's true, and I've heard a lot about it. So thank you so much for being super honest, Jim, and thank you so much for being here. Do you have any social media handles? Where can people find you? Where can people find Phantom Space?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at James N. Cantrell, and you can also go to my personal website, jimcantrell.com. I do have a book coming out. I've got the galleys that I'm in final editing. It should be available on Amazon. It's called Breaking All the Rules, and it tells the story of new space and how it arrived from what was once government-dominated space. And I feel a little bit like the Forrest Gump of space, having witnessed it. So that's the story.
Wow. So you're an author as well. Well, guys, you guys already know something else. That's great. Wait, is it going to be international?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll make sure to buy it then. Thank you so much, Jim. And remember, guys, that you can also find more information, interesting articles, interesting interviews, just like this one with Jim, directly on our website, controlhub.com/builder-nation. We would love to hear from you and to hear from your company and your story. And once again, Jim, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time. We highly appreciate it.
My pleasure.